Hi, and welcome to the next episode of Belly to Belly. And today we're here to talk about US expansion. And who better to talk about US expansion with than the head of US Expansion Partners, David Rose. Welcome, David.
Hi, Bill. Thanks for having me on the podcast today.
It's great to be with you. And, our audience are companies that are expanding into the US. That's who we're really talking to here. And so, I'd love, we're going to get into a conversation about sort of best practices. But before we do that, if you wouldn't mind just taking a moment to talk a little bit about your work and how you help companies, and that obviously gives any comments you make good context. So if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit more. Yeah.
So, my background, I've been in tech here in the U.S. my whole career. I started my career with an HR tech company out of undergraduate, and had a unique opportunity to do a startup inside of that company. Started a new business line, and we grew it to $150 million in revenue in less than 2 years. Bought a $400 million publicly traded company, and it's grown into a $5 billion line of business. So that was my first startup inside a Fortune 500 company. And it's kind of all I've done ever since. So I've done 5 venture-backed startups. I'm a 3-time CEO. So I've been doing tech startups in the US for many years now, and have learned a lot about what to do and what not to do. And I just, more than anything else, like a lot of things that are coincidental, was contacted by a company who was looking for help with expanding to the US. And I had just moved from CEO to chairman of a company. I had some open cycles, and I thought, well, I sure like you guys. I know how to do that. Why don't I just take that on as a project to help? Not realizing it's a much bigger problem that seems unsolved in the market than I had planned on. So here we go. We're going to start a business to solve for this.
That's fantastic. So, we want to talk about, sort of get to best practices. But before we do, maybe talking a little bit about, as you look at companies coming into the US, what are the big things that they get challenged by as they're looking to expand here?
That's a great question, and that's a huge answer. So I'll try and make it as because there's a lot of pitfalls. And I think one of the big ones that has to do with employees, which are going to be your biggest cost when you come to the US. And I think there's a couple. So I always think about expanding to the US in sort of 3 stages. So you have basically an entity formation. You have to create a company. You have to make it operationally ready, have accounting and banking and HR and those kind of things in places. And then you start thinking about go to market. So I think a lot of times the first step a companies make is they're just going to come in and want to hire someone without really thinking about how do you create an entity, how do you have it operationally ready so you can pay bills and make payroll and those kind of things. And then what really is your go-to-market strategies? The first step, a lot of times people say is, I'm ready to hire. And I think that's a kind of step 4. So a lot of times people get ahead of themselves and kind of jump right to that step. And if you do the other 3 kind of previous to that, I think you'll find a lot more success. And then the other thing around people, I see people doing very quickly is they're going to want to hire a senior executive in the US. So they're going to I want to hire a US CEO. I mean, that was a conversation I had with my first clients. We want to hire a US CEO. And it makes a lot of sense on paper. But what you realize is if you go after someone in the US who has a really great CV and great deep experience, right? And so maybe they've worked in, maybe you're a tech company, and maybe this person you're looking at for your CEO has worked at a great brand like Stripe or Figma or Microsoft or Google. What you don't realize is just because they've had a great career in the US doesn't mean they know anything about starting a business in the US. In fact, most people who are a senior executive at Microsoft or Google probably have no idea how payroll works or HR works or insurance works, or even how go-to-market works or how to look for product market fit signals, because all it's been done for them before. So they're probably a great scaling executive, but probably not so great at a startup executive.
That makes sense. So yeah, really talking about the timing of personnel and making sure that you have the right people at the right stage of the process. It sounds like a really massive challenge that a lot of companies deal with.
For sure. And I think another really important step is a lot of companies make the mistake of, because they have really good product market fit signals in their home country, they assume that they're going to have really great product market fit signals in the US, and they overhire too quickly. And so I would also recommend, hey, let's start out. Let's kind of do those entity formation, operations, go-to-market hiring in that step. But let's not go hire 10 people, right? You might think you have product market fit signal, but let's hire 1 or 2, and let's test our theories. Let's look at our pricing. Let's look at customers, partners, see what kind of traction we're getting, and look for signals that we are getting it right before we really scale hiring. Otherwise, you hire a bunch of really expensive people you can't really optimize for performance early on.
Yeah, we actually have our clients bring out back out the business model canvas, and it's sort of like, all right, you remember the 9 quadrants or the
Oh
nine
yeah.
rectangles? Let's just focus back on the customer segment and the value proposition. Make sure, as you said, we have product market fit before we go and try to solve the other 7 rectangles. Let's make sure the first 2 are appropriate, and those sort of answer the other questions anyway
Yeah,
when we have
exactly.
those right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It saves you a lot of money because people, professional salespeople specifically are very expensive. And if you're not ready to utilize them to their full capacity, you're spending a lot of money that you don't need to spend early on.
Well, and probably also they're going to turn over fairly quick because they're not going to find success, and obviously they're somewhat success based and
Oh, for
compensation.
sure.
So
Yeah, I mean, salespeople, the
so
most important thing they want is to be able to be successful, right? And
right.
hit their quotas and make commissions. And if they're not doing that, you're right. In the U.S., they aren't going to stick around long.
Yeah, yeah. No, really interesting. So, okay, so now we've got a couple of things that kind of are real landmines for companies coming in. So when you see companies that are successful and or leaders that are successful in U.S. market entry, what are the common attributes? What are the things that are sort of consistent with the top performers?
Well, I think asking a lot of questions and listening is really important, right? So I think there's people who come in and just assume they know how things work in the US and they're just going to go forward. But the ones I find that we're really curious how things work and what the differences are between the markets and the countries and the territories and how the cultures are different and how business is different, ask a lot of questions and really want to understand it, I find are much more successful in the long run versus those who are just super aggressive and hit the ground running as fast and hard as they can.
Yeah, so asking questions. It's funny as you were saying that, I'm going, it's so ego. Ego is sort of, I mean, not to say ego's a bad thing, because if we didn't have ego, we wouldn't say let's cross an ocean and
Right.
and sort of we need that. That's really important. But I suppose if we're not listening to whether it's our partners and any folks that are advising us, but also if we're not listening to our customers, then there are, from what you're saying, really significant problems.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And again, if you just come and you really want to learn, you're going to be more successful than if you just want to run hard. You have to run hard in the US. It's super competitive in every category, in every industry, but learning along the way will yield much better results.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So, and then, looking at, if there's kind of one thing that you would say a company should focus on, and it seems like there are many, but if there were kind of one big tip that 100%, if you don't get this right, it's challenging. What would be the kind of core of that?
Well, I'll tell you one mistake I see or one misperception I talk to people about a lot, especially in the technology business. I'll hear when I talk to them about, hey, here's kind of the steps to create a U.S. entity. And they're like, no, I don't want to do any of that. I just want to hire a contract sales rep on commission only to go sell my products. And one of the things that I talk to people about, and again, I'm not sure it works differently in different regions and different territories and countries, but in the US, especially in technology, if someone has the skill set to sell expensive B2B complex software to Fortune 500 companies, they can command a pretty high salary. And if that's the business space you're in, you have to stop and think, if anyone would be willing to come work for your company to work for commission only, the only reason they would do that is because they can't get a job anywhere else. And they ultimately don't have those skills, or they wouldn't be talking to you. Right. And so I think that's a common mistake of people like, oh, I don't want to start a company. I just want to hire a sales rep to work in commission and drive sales for us. And I've never seen that work. Never seen that work.
Well, we always look at that first 6 to 12 months, that first phase of entry, as sort of, yeah, you certainly want to get, early customers and some pilots going and all that kind of stuff. But parallel to that, you're building a sales system and, sort of ideally a repeatable process. And it always, to your point exactly, is when people hire sort of the lone wolf salesperson, whether it's a commission only or just that single salesperson, it feels to me like you're sort of hiring somebody to drive your car, but asking them to build the car, which is
Right.
really two quite different
For sure.
activities.
In that same vein, Bill, a lot of companies think about, as you get into other industries outside of technology, you might looking for a distributor or a reseller or a partner to take their product to market. And those are legitimate go-to-market strategies, but only if there is demand in the marketplace for your product, right? And so if you don't have any marketing support, if you don't have any sales support, if you don't have anything that's going to help drive that demand for your product, you can sign all the resellers and distributors you want, but they're not going to go take it to market unless there's customers asking for it, right? And there's demand for the product. So it's not just as simple as I'm going to sign a distributor. You really have to be thoughtful about how are you going to drive demand for the product in the US to drive business to that distributor and that reseller so they can be successful. And once they're successful, they'll put more into it as well.
Right. Yeah, it's always great to see the companies that have the sort of the partner page, and it's just it's just solid logos, and then you go and talk to the CEO about can you tell me about the productivity of the partners? How what do you get out of that? And it ends up sounding a lot like the Pareto rule, where 20% are creating 80% of the results,
Right.
But yeah, the activation of those partners, probably sort of the less better is better philosophy might be helpful there.
Right.
But
yeah, overall, not only kind of go to market, but all those demand strategies, right? So events are an important part of that as well, obviously, right? So you have to get your product in front of customers, and you have to build relationships. And so that's just the overall go to market is much more important than just basically I'm going to hire a sales rep or a distributor, in the US and expect fantastic sales growth.
Well, and probably a challenge too to sort of outsource sales in that you'll be an arm's length then from hearing the customers' challenges, hearing getting the testimonials, all those types of things. So the evolution of growth will be, if it works, would be even slower because you don't have the intimacy with the customer too, I would guess.
Right. And of course, all the other things that we're kind of talking a lot about the employee side, which is kind of more complex, but there's all kinds of administrative and compliance issues. A lot of people don't realize, if you're coming from a country in Europe, there might be one government jurisdiction, and you're not used to dealing in the US. You have the federal government and you have 50 states, right? We just had a call recently with a company, a client of mine, who has sales happening in over 10 states in the US. And all of a sudden you have to figure out how to do sales tax in 10 different states. And so there's a lot of complexities people don't realize. They're used to dealing with one tax jurisdiction or one governmental agency, not realizing you're going to be dealing with dozens of them in the US. And by the way, the rules are often different on a state by state basis on all kinds of fronts. Yeah.
No, it's not simple, and that's why folks like you exist to help companies navigate those challenging waters for sure. And so this has been really great, David. I appreciate you so much spending the time. And what we'll do is we'll put your contact info in the description below and all that. But okay, if people reach out if they have questions.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to talk. I'm always happy to talk with companies looking to come to the US and answer any questions. I love business and love companies coming here, so I'm always happy to talk anytime I get the chance.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, thank you again for taking the time today, and we'll look forward to our next conversation.
Thanks, Bill. Great to see you. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Appreciate it.
Take care.